My name is Alara Vance. I'm an architectural historian, which is a formal way of saying I spend my days trying to understand the stories that buildings tell. I live in Port Townsend, a small city on the northern tip of Washington's Olympic Peninsula, a place caught between the deep green of ancient forests and the moody gray of the Salish Sea. My own home is a modest clapboard cottage, painted the color of sea glass, with a view of the water from my upstairs office. I've always been drawn to things that lasto the integrity of a well-laid foundation, the honesty of old-growth timber, the way a structure settles into its landscape over a century, becoming part of the earth it was built upon. My father, Arthur, was a stonemason. He taught me to see the world in terms of balance and stress, to appreciate the unseen forces that hold things together. He spent his life on his knees, coaxing beauty from granite and fieldstone, and by the time he was 60, his own foundations were crumbling. His knees were shot, his back a constant thrum of pain. He had built monuments for other people, but his own body was the price. That's why I planned the trip. 10 days in Tuscany. A pilgrimage, really. For him to see the Duomo in Florence, to walk the Ponte Vecchio, to feel the ancient stone of Siena under his hands not as a laborer, but as an admirer. It was to be a gift of rest, a thank you for a lifetime of hard work. I'd saved for 2 years, meticulously planning every detail. Flights on Alitalia, a beautiful apartment in the Oltrarno district with a small terrace overlooking a quiet courtyard, private tours of the Uffizi and Accademia, so he wouldn't have to stand in long lines. I'd booked it for the 4 of us, my father, my mother Annalise, my younger sister Clara, and me. It was meant to be a chance to rebuild something in our own family, a structure that had felt unsteady for years. A chance, I hoped, to feel like we were all part of the same design again. 2 weeks before our departure, while I was cross-referencing museum hours with our scheduled walking tours, my phone chimed with a group text from my mother. The message was from her, but the tone was an unfamiliar composite, a decision forged in a conversation I was not a part of. "We've decided Leo will go instead of you. He'll take better photos for his portfolio." That was all. Not "we were thinking" or "would you mind," but the finality of a gavel. "We've decided." My name, Alara, wasn't there. I was simply you, the variable to be swapped out. Leo was my sister's fiancé, a man whose entire personality seemed to be curated for social media. The words hovered in the quiet of my office, stark and surreal. I read them once, twice, a third time. The soft ticking of the ship's clock on my mantelpiece suddenly felt deafening. The message implied a consensus I had no vote in, a unanimous decision about my own gift, my own seat. I didn't reply. What was there to say? An argument felt like begging for a place at a table I had built and set myself. I leaned back in my chair, the worn leather sighing under my weight, and stared at the framed blueprints on my wall. Weeks of planning, months of saving, years of a quiet, hopeful yearning for this very thing. A gift for my father, twisted into a transaction where I had been deemed the least valuable asset. Leo, who referred to sunsets as content opportunities and whose primary contribution to family dinners was critiquing the restaurant's branding. Leo, who had once explained the concept of van life to my father, a man who had spent 40 years working outdoors, as if it were a revolutionary philosophy. Leo, the designated photographer. I opened the Alitalia app on my phone. My name was still there, a digital ghost in seat 14A. For a moment, a wave of profound sadness washed over me, so deep and vast it felt like the gray sea outside my window. It wasn't the fiery rage of betrayal, but the cold, quiet ache of erasure. They hadn't just taken my ticket, they had taken my role, my intention, my love, and deemed it less important than a well-framed photo for an Instagram feed. I didn't cry. Instead, a strange and unfamiliar clarity began to settle in my mind, like dust settling after a demolition. I opened a new document on my computer. I didn't label it revenge or payback. I titled it Foundations. And in it, I began to list every part of the trip I had so carefully constructed. Flights, apartment, tours, dinner reservations, train tickets to Siena. Next to each item, I wrote a single, quiet word, mine. Then I opened another document and named it the Hemlock House Ledger. It was time to review the structural integrity of my own life. The Hemlock House. I bought it 5 years ago, a little saltbox cottage nestled in a grove of hemlock trees at the edge of town. It was in disrepair, but it had good bones. I saw its potential, the story it could tell with a little care. I spent a year restoring it myself on weekends, learning to plaster and paint, replacing the old wiring, sanding the original fir floors until their warm, honeyed glow returned. My plan was to rent it out, a small but steady source of income, an investment in my own future. I never intended for it to become a refuge for my family. But then, 2 years ago, the construction firm my father subcontracted for went bankrupt. His work, already sporadic, dried up completely. My mother's part-time job at a local boutique wasn't enough. The phone call from my mother was steeped in a carefully calibrated blend of panic and pride. "We just need a little time, Alara. A few months to get back on our feet. The landlord is selling our place." The words "a little time" are the most dangerous in any family's vocabulary. They are vague and elastic, stretching to accommodate years of inertia. I heard the unspoken plea beneath her words, the familiar weight of familial obligation. So I gave them the keys to the Hemlock House. I didn't ask for a deposit or a lease. We made a verbal agreement. They would pay $400 a month, just enough to cover the property taxes and insurance. It was less than a quarter of the market rate, a gesture of love. The first few payments arrived on time. Then they became sporadic. A car repair, a dental emergency, a slow month. The excuses were always delivered with a sigh, positioning them as the victims of circumstance and me, if I were to press the issue, as the unfeeling creditor. By the second year, the payments had stopped altogether, but their lifestyle hadn't seemed to adjust. A new espresso machine, the same one I had bookmarked on my Amazon wish list, appeared on their kitchen counter. An expensive-looking electric bike for my father to help him stay active. Asking for the money I was owed felt like a transgression. It created a tension that hummed in the air whenever I visited, a low-grade resentment that made my shoulders tight. So I stopped asking. Instead, I started a private spreadsheet. It wasn't for revenge, it was for my own sanity. A way to quantify the imbalance, to give a name and number to the feeling that I was being slowly drained. As of last month, the unpaid rent and utilities totaled over $18,000. A silent, accumulating debt that lived only on my hard drive. Clara moved in a year after them. Her latest fallout with a roommate had ended, as they always did, with her declaring the other person toxic and unreasonable. She arrived with an entire car full of clothes, a yapping terrier named Dolce, and Leo in tow. The Hemlock House, my quiet, restored sanctuary, became their crowded, chaotic hub. Clara treated my generosity as an entitlement. She once used my grocery delivery account to order $200 worth of organic produce and artisanal cheese. When I gently sent her a request for the amount, she laughed. "Oh, Alara, don't be so transactional. It's family." But it felt deeply transactional. It felt like a business where I was the sole investor in a failing enterprise, pouring in resources, time, and emotional capital with no hope of return. My love was being treated as a line of credit they had no intention of ever repaying. The morning after the text message about the trip, I sat at my desk and looked out at the mist clinging to the hemlock branches. I updated the ledger, adding the cost of the 4 plane tickets to the running total. Then I picked up the phone and called a locksmith. If they wanted to treat me like a service provider, like a bank or a landlord, then it was time they were introduced to the terms and conditions. Leo had entered our lives like an invasive species, beautiful and fast-growing, but ultimately destructive to the native ecosystem. The first time Clara brought him home, he shook my hand with the practiced firmness of a man who had attended numerous networking seminars. He surveyed the living room of the Hemlock House not as a guest, but as an appraiser. "Great natural light," he'd commented, "fantastic for verticals." According to Clara, He was a digital nomad and brand strategist, which seemed to mean he took artistic photos of lattes and wrote long, philosophical captions about authenticity, while being entirely funded by a trust fund from his grandfather. He spoke in a lexicon of buzzword synergy, disruption, scalability, pivot that hung in the air like smoke, obscuring the fact that he produced nothing of tangible value. Clara was mesmerized. She saw him as a visionary. My mother found him charismatic. My father, weary from a lifetime of actual work, would just nod along, his eyes glazed over. The night I announced the Florence trip was a rare family dinner I'd hosted at my own cottage. I'd made pasta from scratch. I laid out the itinerary, the beautiful brochures, the confirmation emails. I watched my father's face as I spoke. A light came on in his eyes, a flicker of the young, hopeful man he must have been before his body betrayed him. He shuffled to his bookshelf and pulled down a heavy, dog-eared art book on Renaissance architecture. "The dome, Alara," he'd whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Brunelleschi didn't use any scaffolding. Can you imagine? For a few beautiful, fleeting minutes, the trip felt exactly as I had intended it, a pure, uncomplicated gift. We were a family, connected and happy. Then Clara cleared her throat. "This is amazing, Alara. But do you think Leo could come too? It would be an incredible opportunity for his portfolio." The warmth in the room chilled instantly. I kept my voice even. "Oh, I'm sorry, sweetie. The tickets and the apartment are all booked for 4. It's a gift for Dad." "Well, can you just book one more ticket?" she pressed, a familiar edge of petulance in her voice. "He could just crash on the couch." "The budget is already stretched," I said softly, trying to be gentle but firm. "And this is really meant to be a family thing." Clara's face hardened. She stood up, crossing her arms. "You're just being exclusionary. You've always been like this. You never want to share." The accusation hung in the air, so preposterous in the context of the house they were living in for free, the trip I was single-handedly funding. Leo looked down at his phone, feigning disinterest in our petty family drama. My mother murmured something about finding a way to make it work, her default setting for conflict avoidance. My father, the man for whom this was all intended, just looked down at his book, his brief moment of joy extinguished. The scaffolding of our pleasant evening had collapsed. That night, I couldn't sleep. I felt a cold knot of dread in my stomach. The next day, I started making calls. I began with the airline Alitalia. I feigned a simple query, asking to confirm my seat assignment. I knew, instinctively, that something was wrong. I just needed to hear it. The agent on the other end was professional and detached. "One moment, MS. Fiancée, I see. There is a note on your reservation. Your booking was changed last Tuesday." I held my breath. "Changed how?" "A call was received from someone identifying as your sister," the agent said, her voice a flat recitation of facts. "She reported that you'd had a medical emergency and were unable to travel. She requested the name on the ticket be changed to Mr. Leonardo Rossi." A cold wave washed over me. A medical emergency. They had lied. And was the name changed? I asked, my own voice sounding distant to my ears. "No, ma'am. Our fare class does not permit name changes. However, there is another note. At check-in yesterday at SeaTac, an agent flagged a boarding pass discrepancy. A Mr. Rossi attempted to board using the ticket issued in your name, Alara Vance. It's been escalated to our corporate security department as potential identity fraud." I closed my eyes. They hadn't just given my seat away. They had tried to give my identity away. Leo had stood at that gate, holding a piece of paper with my name on it, intending to pass himself off as me to get on that plane. The audacity, the sheer, breathtaking entitlement of it, was staggering. I spent the rest of the day on the phone, filing a report with the airline's fraud department. I sent them scans of my driver's license, screenshots of the group text, and a timeline of events. They were incredibly helpful, taking the matter with the gravity it deserved. By evening, I had a clearer picture. My mother and father had checked in normally. Clara had likely caused a scene, claiming it was all a simple mix-up. Leo, denied boarding, had been left behind at the gate. My family had flown to Florence without him, but the attempt, the intention, was what mattered. I looked at the group text on my phone again, the message still sitting there, unread by me in the chat, a monument to their casual cruelty. He'll take better photos. They didn't just want my money and my seat. They wanted my name. My very existence was simply an obstacle to be circumvented. I opened the Foundation's document again. I scrolled down past the flights and the apartment. I added a new section titled Boundaries. Then I opened my web browser, navigated to the online portal for the smart lock I'd installed on my own cottage, and changed the guest access code. Before I closed my laptop, I looked at that text from my mother one last time. I whispered it to the quiet, empty room. I see you. And for the first time, I felt I truly, completely did. My first call was to the lovely little apartment I'd rented in Florence, the one with the terracotta-tiled terrace. I spoke to the owner, a woman named Sophia, whose English was lyrical and warm. I explained, without going into detail, that my travel plans had changed and my family would be arriving without me. "Will you require my identification for them to check in?" I asked. "Oh no, Ms. Vance," she said kindly. "Your card has been charged for the full stay. The keys will be in the lockbox. I hope your family has a wonderful time." "Thank you, Sophia," I said. "Actually, I need to cancel the reservation entirely." There was a pause. "But, Ms. Vance, it is fully non-refundable at this point." "I understand," I said. "Please cancel it." I could hear her confusion, but she agreed. The email confirmation of the cancellation arrived moments later. I saved it to a folder on my desktop. Next, I called the tour company that had arranged our private guide for the Uffizi Gallery. Then the vineyard in Chianti where I'd booked a tasting and lunch. The cooking school in the Tuscan countryside. The car service I'd hired to take my father to the rolling hills he'd only ever seen in books. With each call, I used the same calm, polite script. "My plans have unfortunately changed. I need to cancel." Some offered credits, others partial refunds. I accepted whatever they offered, not because I needed the money, but because each cancellation confirmation was another brick being laid in a new wall of self-preservation. Each email was a quiet click of a lock I was installing around my own life. The return flights were more complex. The outbound leg had been flown. But the airline, now armed with a pending fraud investigation, was more than willing to assist. They placed a high-security alert on the return tickets for Annalise, Arthur, and Clara Vance. They would be subject to enhanced screening and identity verification at the airport in Rome. My next step felt more significant, more permanent. I called the locksmith I'd spoken to earlier and confirmed his appointment for that afternoon. He was a quiet, methodical man who worked with an air of respectful efficiency. He replaced the locks on the front door, the back door, and the small workshop of the Hemlock house. I watched as he carved out the space for the new deadbolt, the fresh shavings of wood falling to the porch like sawdust memories. When he was done, he handed me a set of 3 new, gleaming keys. They felt solid and real in my hand. I went inside the now empty house. It smelled of my mother's floral perfume, my father's faint scent of sawdust and liniment, the cloying aroma of whatever scented candle Clara was burning. I walked through the rooms, taking in the clutter they had accumulated, the way they had filled every available space. It was no longer my restored sanctuary, it was their storage unit, a physical manifestation of their encroachment on my life. I had already contacted a local property management firm. I'd paid them a rush fee to draft a formal, ironclad lease agreement for the Hemlock house. It stipulated the market rent, $2,800 a month. Utilities not included. First and last month's rent, plus a security deposit, due upon signing. I'd also had them prepare a formal 30-day notice to vacate. One way or another, the era of assumptions was over. My final call of the day was to a real estate attorney, Mr. Davies, a man with a reputation for being calm, thorough, and unshakable. I laid out the situation for him: the house, the unpaid rent, the trip, the attempted fraud. I spoke in the language of facts and timelines, the language I understood. I sent him the spreadsheet, the cancellation emails, the screenshot of the text. He listened without interruption. When I was finished, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear the faint sound of him tapping a pen on his desk. "Alara," he said finally, his voice measured and serious. "You have been extraordinarily patient. Let's make sure we do this by the book. It's the cleanest way. It's the only way." That night, for the first time in years, I slept without a knot of anxiety in my stomach. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't sent a single angry text. I had simply redrawn my own property lines. The silence that followed felt like peace. The first text arrived at 3:22 a.m. Florence time, which was just after 6 p.m. For me, it was from Clara. "The apartment key isn't working. The owner says the reservation was canceled. What did you do? This is a nightmare." I read the message, took a sip of my chamomile tea, and turned my phone face down on the counter. I did not reply. An hour later, my mother started a string of frantic messages. "Alara, call me immediately. There has been a terrible mistake with the hotel. Clara is hysterical. Your father is exhausted. Where are we supposed to go?" I pictured them, standing on a cobblestone street in Florence, their luggage surrounding them, the warm evening light casting long shadows. I imagined their confusion turning to indignation, their shared assumption that I, the ever-reliable Alara, would of course materialize via text message to solve the problem I had apparently created. They had ejected me from the equation, but still expected me to balance the books. By the next morning, my phone was a tapestry of their panic and fury. From Clara, "The Uffizi tickets are gone too. You did this on purpose. You are trying to ruin this for Dad." From my mother, "I don't know what has gotten into you. This is the most selfish, vindictive thing you have ever done. You have embarrassed us." And then a new voice. A text from an unknown Italian number. It was Leo. He had clearly bought a local SIM card and been filled in. "Alara, this is incredibly unprofessional. We had brand collaborations lined up for this trip. You have jeopardized significant partnerships." I almost laughed. Unprofessional. As if our relationship was a business contract he was qualified to critique. The only message that cut me was one from Clara late that afternoon. A photo of my father, sitting on a bench, looking small and lost. The caption read, "He just wanted to see the art. I hope you're happy." The manipulation was so blatant, so finely honed from years of practice. It was a deft attempt to reposition me as the villain, the cruel daughter who had snatched her father's dream away. They conveniently omitted the fact that they had been the ones to remove me from the picture first. They had torn up the invitation, but were now furious that the party had been canceled. I looked at the picture of my father for a long time. A pang of sadness hit me, sharp and true. He was a casualty in this, a quiet man caught in the crossfire of his wife's and daughter's entitlement. But he had also been silent. He had sat there at the dinner table and let Clara's words hang in the air. He had boarded the plane, knowing I was supposed to be in one of those seats. His silence was a form of consent. I opened my laptop. I found the page for the local hospital's foundation, the one raising money for new surgical equipment. My father had been on a waiting list for his knee replacement for over a year. I made an anonymous donation for $500. Then I closed my computer, put on my walking shoes, and went for a long walk along the bluffs overlooking the water. The wind was cold and clean, and it felt like it was scouring the last remnants of their drama from my soul. I was cruel. I was selfish. I was vindictive. Their words echoed in my head, but for the first time, they had no power. They were just noise. The truth was I was finally, simply, taking care of myself. They returned a week later, cutting the trip short. I knew because the property manager I'd hired had been tasked with delivering the official paperwork to the Hemlock house. He called me after he'd posted the notice. "They're home," he said. The lady of the house was not pleased to see me. I had a choice. I could meet them there, face the storm head-on. Or I could let the paperwork speak for me. I chose the latter. I was done with conversations that went in circles, with emotional appeals designed to erode my resolve. This was a matter of property and law now. It was clean. The phone calls started almost immediately. First Clara, screaming, sobbing, calling me a monster for evicting my own family. Then my mother, her voice cold with a terrifying, formal rage. "After all we have done for you," she said, a line so distorted from reality that it was almost sublime in its audacity. I didn't answer. I let every call go to voicemail. I forwarded the audio files to Mr. Davies with a short, simple note, "For the record." The final confrontation happened 2 days later. They didn't call first. They just showed up at my cottage, their car pulling into my gravel driveway with an aggressive crunch. Annalise, Clara, and Arthur. My father got out of the car slowly, leaning heavily on a cane I'd never seen before. He wouldn't meet my eyes. I met them on my porch, holding a copy of the lease agreement. I didn't invite them in. "What is the meaning of this?" my mother demanded, waving the eviction notice. "Are you throwing your own father out on the street?" "No," I said, my voice steady. "I'm offering you a formal contract to legitimize your tenancy. This is the lease. It's $2,800 a month. You have 30 days to sign it or vacate the property." Clara gasped. "You can't be serious. We're family." "Family doesn't attempt to commit identity fraud to steal a plane ticket," I replied, the words falling calmly and precisely into the tense air. The color drained from Clara's face. My mother looked momentarily stunned into silence. Even my father flinched. "That was a misunderstanding," my mother finally stammered. "This," I said, holding up the lease, "is an understanding. It's a legal document. It has clear terms. It's what you give to people who live in a house you own. You can sign it, and we can have a formal, respectful landlord-tenant relationship. Or you can leave. The choice is yours." My father finally looked at me then. His eyes were filled with a deep, weary sadness. "Elara," he said, his voice raspy. "Please, don't do this." "I'm not doing this, Dad," I said, my own voice softening with a sorrow that surprised me. "You all did this. You made a decision. Now I'm making one." I held the lease out to him. He didn't take it. After a long, silent moment, they turned and walked back to their car. I went back inside my house, locked the door, and for the first time, I allowed myself to cry. Not for them, but for the final, heartbreaking confirmation that the family I had been trying to hold together for so long no longer existed, if it ever had at all. They never signed the lease. The 30 days passed in a heavy, protracted silence. I received a few more vitriolic texts from Clara and a long, rambling email from my mother that wove a narrative of my childhood generosity with my current, inexplicable cruelty. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of their actions. Just a profound, unshakable sense of their own victimhood. On the 31st day, Mr. Davies filed the official eviction with the court. The process was impersonal and swift. The court date was set. They didn't show up. The judgment was granted in my favor. A week later, on a gray, drizzling Tuesday, a sheriff's deputy escorted them from the Hemlock house. I wasn't there to see it. The property manager handled the key exchange and the final walkthrough. He told me they left a great deal of their things behind, as if they intended to be back any minute. The weeks that followed were strange. The silence from them was absolute. It was like a phantom limb. I kept expecting a text or a call, but none came. I hired a crew to clear out the house, to pack their belongings into boxes, and put them in a storage unit I paid for 3 months in advance. I sent the key and the address to my mother via registered mail. She never acknowledged its receipt. I walked through the empty Hemlock house again. It felt lighter, bigger. The air was clean. I opened all the windows, letting the salty breeze blow through, chasing out the last of their ghosts. It was just a house again, a structure of wood and nails and glass, waiting for a new story. I decided not to rent it out right away. I needed it to be quiet for a while. A year drifted by. I found a new rhythm in my life, one that was not dictated by the needs and dramas of others. I worked, I walked on the beach, I read books, I reconnected with old friends. I started sketching new designs in my free time, ideas for small, sustainable homes that worked with the landscape instead of imposing on it. The knot in my shoulders had dissolved. The low-grade hum of anxiety that had been my constant companion for years was gone. I was just peaceful. Then, one Sunday afternoon, they appeared at my door again. It was my mother and father. Clara was not with them. They looked different. Thinner. Older. My father's reliance on his cane was more pronounced. My mother's face, once a mask of defiant anger, was etched with a sort of brittle exhaustion. "We're not here to fight," my mother said, her voice quiet, stripped of its usual authority. I didn't speak. I just leaned against my doorframe and waited. "Your father's surgery is scheduled," she continued, twisting the strap of her purse. "Medicare will only cover a portion of it. We were living in a small apartment in Port Angeles. It's all we can afford. We can't manage the copay." She looked at me, her eyes pleading. "We need some help, Alara. Just until he's back on his feet." That phrase again. Just until. The echo of it hung in the air between us. A lifetime of just untils. I felt a flicker of the old obligation, the deep, cellular programming of a daughter. But it was faint now, a distant signal. It was quickly replaced by the quiet, steady strength I had spent the last year building. I didn't invite them in. I turned, walked to my desk, and took out a checkbook. I wrote a check to my father, Arthur Vance, for $5,000. It was enough to cover the surgery copay and several months of physical therapy. I walked back to the door and handed it to my father. He took it, his hand trembling slightly as he looked at the amount. My mother's eyes filled with tears of what looked like relief. "Oh, Alara," she whispered. "Thank you. I knew you wouldn't let us down. Does this mean can we start to fix things?" I looked from my mother's hopeful face to my father's downcast one. And I knew my answer had to be as solid and immovable as the foundations he once built. "No," I said, and the word was not cruel, just true. "This isn't forgiveness. And it's not a reconciliation. This is the last entry in the ledger. I'm closing the books. The money is a gift, with no expectation of repayment. But it's the last one." My father looked up at me then, and in his eyes, I saw a flicker of something I hadn't seen before, a glimmer of understanding. He nodded slowly. "I see," he said, his voice barely a whisper. My mother looked like I had slapped her. "But we're your family." "I know," I said softly. "And I wish you both well. I hope the surgery is a success, Dad." I stepped back inside and gently closed the door. I didn't watch them leave. I stood in my hallway for a long time, listening to the sound of my own quiet breathing. The check wasn't an act of grace. It was an act of severance. A final, clean transaction that allowed me to walk away with a clear conscience, knowing I had done the right thing on my own terms. A week later, a small envelope arrived. Inside was a thank you card. The handwriting was my father's, shaky but clear. It just said, "Thank you, Alara, for everything." There was no other message. I didn't need one. I put the card on my desk. I didn't know what the future held, whether our fractured family could ever be pieced back together into something new and different, something healthier. Maybe or maybe not. But for the first time, I felt okay with the uncertainty. I had found my own foundation, and I knew, with a quiet and profound certainty, that it was strong enough to hold me up, all on its own. I had finally learned the difference between a home and a house, and I was content in the one I had built for myself.